Listen, you do not want to buy property, and I mean any kind of property, rural property, property in town, whatever the case is. You do not want to buy any of that until you watch this video, because there are some big things that you have got to know about, and I'm going to tell you all about them on this video right here as we walk around this property. Okay, so I get the whole concept. Like, so many people think that they fall in love with the idea of buying a piece of land, building their dream home, getting exactly what they want, and they think, hey, you know what, I found this piece of property over here, it was $100,000, it was a super good deal, or whatever the price is, maybe even less than that. And hey, we could throw a house on there, build exactly what we want, and all will be perfect. We'll have exactly what we're thinking. Okay, it just doesn't happen like that all the time, because there's so many unknown things, so many variables at play when you're buying property that you got to know about, and I'm going to tell you all about those on this video right here. Okay, so first and foremost, you have got to know about the zoning and the land use regulations, right? So when you're buying a piece of property, the county, the city, whatever it is that you're in, if you're outside of the city limits, you're in the county, they have their zoning regulations, and they tell you what you can and can't do with the property, okay, based on the type of zoning. So if you want to have a big garden, or you want to have livestock, or you want to have, you know, whatever the case is, they have regulations that tell you what you can and can't do with that property. And some of those regulations say that you can't have a home on the property. Okay, so if it's, you know, some sort of agricultural type property or forest resource type property, you may not be able to put a home on it. And so that's something that's very important to know. Obviously, before you buy the property, if your intent is to put a home on it, you need to know those things. Okay, so that's very important, is understanding what you can do with the property in terms of the zoning and land use regulations, all that kind of stuff. Okay, so that's a big one right there. Water rights and irrigation is another one. Right, so a lot of people misunderstand water rights, and they think that, hey, I've got a well on my property, and so I can just use as much water as I want. I have, you know, 10 acres of hay, and I can water it all because I've got a well. That's not always the case. And I know that varies by state, but here in Oregon, you cannot do that. You have to have, you can only irrigate up to a half an acre unless you have the water rights, the irrigation rights, to irrigate more than that, right? And so that's a very important thing that people misunderstand very frequently, is the actual, you know, real need for water rights, depending on what you intend to do with the property. So especially if you're looking at something in town, a city lot, that's no big deal. Okay, you probably don't care at all about water rights and irrigation in that type of a scenario. But if you're looking especially at rural property and larger rural properties, where maybe you want to have some sort of you know, livestock or pasture land, or you know, large garden or something to that effect, you really need to make sure you do your homework and you understand exactly what you can do in terms of those things on your property. Okay, the next thing you got to really think about is improvements. So when you have a property and you're buying just vacant land, you need to think about, what does the property come with? Okay, does it have a well? Does it have septic? Does it have power already to the property? Okay, is there a road cut to it? Is there a house pad cut to it? What are those things that cost you? All that's really important. Okay, and so something I suggest to people a lot of times is, if you can find a property that already has maybe a manufactured home on it, an old rundown house, that's a good place to start, because, you know, it already has, in most cases, a well and septic and power already there, unless it's a totally off-grid place that's not legally built. But those are important things. Okay, and so you want to make sure that you are thinking about that, right? Because it can be very costly. So if you have to put a well in, it could be tens of thousands of dollars, or it could be a pretty reasonable amount. It depends on how deep they need to dig, but you don't know that until they start digging. Your neighbor might have a great well, but maybe this property doesn't for some reason. So that's very important, is to think about what it costs to actually put those utilities in and all the services that you're going to need. Okay, hidden costs are another thing. Okay, and a lot of people underestimate the hidden costs, right? And there's a lot of them. All right, so when you're developing a property, especially, you know, whether actually it's kind of regardless whether it's in town or not, you're going to have hidden fees that you probably aren't thinking about. Things like the permitting fees for the county. Things like, if you're in the city, you have deferred development costs. You know, maybe you have to put a sidewalk in. because the previous owner didn't do it. And then they're going to require you do it before you actually build your house. Sorry, I have to move my hand here. But those costs are all very, very important to be thinking about and be aware of, because there's a ton of potential hidden ones, right? And then another one is potential tap fees. So if you need to connect into the sewer main, or the water, all those sorts of things, city services, you can get yourself in a really tough position where costs go up quite a bit and can climb quickly. And same with just the building permits, right? Building permits can be very, very expensive, and that's something that people oftentimes don't think about. They just think, I'm going to spend X amount building this house, and I have a buddy who's a contractor and he told me he could do it for this. Well, the fees from the city can cost another $15,000 or $20,000 on top of all your construction costs, and that's before you even put a 2x4 on the property. So very important to be thinking about all of those things. Another big one is whether or not the property has any sort of protected areas, right? So is it in a wetland? Is it in a floodplain? Is there a riparian zone? Is there anything like that that is going to affect your ability to build on the property? That's really, really important to be able to do, to understand, and to know what you can and can't do and where you can and can't do it on the property that you're buying. Similarly, easements and encroachments are another really, really big thing. Okay, so you really need to know whether or not you have any sort of easements across the property that you're looking to buy, okay? And are there any encroachments? And an encroachment would be, for example, if your neighbor, maybe they have a shed or a shop that is too close to your property line, or maybe they have a fence or even a structure that's over your property line, okay? Those are all called encroachments. And that's not a good situation, especially if that encroachment has been there for a long time. It can cause quite a headache and cause a lot of hassle in trying to get those things resolved. And I've been through some of that personally, where our deed for a property that I owned said one thing, the neighbor's deed said something else, and so there was a big dispute about whose deed was right, and it cost thousands and thousands of dollars to resolve. And so those things can get quite expensive quite quickly, and I'm going to tell you a good way to avoid all of that, so you guys stick around for that here at the end. Another big one is connection, like internet connection and cell phone coverage and those sorts of things. So being the day and age that we're in, obviously a lot of people utilize different streaming services and those sorts of things for TV, and just being able to maybe work from home or whatever the case may be. But utilizing those things is pretty popular, and so having a high-speed internet connection is something that is necessary in most homes these days. It's 2024 right now. And so, yeah, I mean, you got to have a good solid internet connection, a fiber connection or something like that. But Starlink is another good option that I know a lot of people utilize if they aren't able to get a more traditional service, but it's costly. So that's something that just you need to keep in mind is, are you going to be able to have good internet? Do you have good cell phone coverage? Or are you going to need to get something like Starlink to be able to offset that? So, and depending on your area where you are geographically, wildfire danger could be another really, really big important one that you need to consider. And so here in Oregon, we've had a lot of issues with fire danger. The state came out with some fire maps that showed fire risk in different areas. And so essentially, the more rural you are, or the further away you are from a fire station, the more you're going to spend on fire insurance. And in some cases, the home will not even be insurable. And so obviously it's something you need to know about before you buy a property, is whether or not you're going to be able to build a home on it that you're going to be able to get insurance on. So definitely do your research on that. You can do some Googling and find different resources for those things. But wildfire risk and insurance is really, really important. And there's a lot of good resources out there too for creating defensible space. And so you can see on this property that I'm walking, there's a lot of these oak trees around. Not a lot of, there's some grass, but not a lot of like brush that kind of creates ladder fuels where a fire could get up into the canopy and all that kind of stuff. And, you probably want to keep this stuff mowed down. But in most cases, there's resources that will tell you like what you should do with your property. And you could always contact, local fire department to help with that. But creating defensible space, around your home, 100-foot barrier around your home so you don't have trees and stuff around it that can catch fire and potentially catch your home on fire. So doing that kind of stuff is also really important to get your head wrapped around what you can and can't do there. The last big one before I tell you some ideas of how to help with these things is that you need to really, really think about the timing, okay? So if you're considering building on property, it could take a year, okay? By the time you buy the property, go through all the hoops of, doing a survey and making sure you can build what you want to build on the property and do the things that you want to do, and then actually getting the permits and then going through and having it built, I mean, you could be over a year easily in a lot of cases. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, is just the timing of, you know, the whole process from identifying the property to then building the home and going through all the hoops that are associated with it. It can be really, really tough. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money. Okay, that is the biggest thing, is like, it is not cheap. This is not your cheap option. Okay, if you want to buy property and build a house, it is often the highest risk and it is often the most expensive. Okay, and that's because on the risk side of things, you don't know if you're going to be able to get good water from your well. Okay, what if you get 300 feet deep and they say, yeah, we don't know, and you got to keep drilling, right? Or what if they have to pick up and drill at another location on the property and try to poke in another well? You don't know. What if you have to spend $50,000 on a sand filter septic system instead of $10,000? Like, who knows? So the risks are very, very real, but I'm going to tell you a couple things about how to help avoid those things. Okay, and the first one is to really just think long and hard. Okay, think long and hard about, is there anything out there that I can buy that's already built that maybe I can renovate, maybe I can, you know, adapt to fit my needs? Or is building a complete custom home really your only way of doing that? Okay, those are, you know, that's a really big thing to think about, is this building the only way that you're going to get what you want, that you're going to be satisfied with? Okay, and if it is, if you have very unique needs or whatever the case is, and building a custom home is the only way to do it, then great, do it. You'll be very happy with it. Just, you need to know the risk is high for those reasons I just explained, and the cost is often very high, much more than if you were to be able to find a comparable home on the market and purchase that and even renovate it to be what you want. It's oftentimes much less expensive to do that. The second big thing I would say to do to help yourself mitigate your risk is to do a survey. Okay, a full-on survey of your property. A surveyor is going to be able to do all that research on the deeds. They're going to do all the research on the property lines and find the corners and see if there's any sort of encroachment, see if there's any sort of easement that maybe you didn't know about, all that kind of stuff. So really, you know, getting a survey is a wise move. If you're buying rural property, I would personally never buy rural property without doing one. Now that I've had my lesson learned with the boundary line agreement and the encroachment that we had, or sorry, the deed discrepancy that we had, I would never buy rural property without it personally. I know there's plenty of people that do it, but that's something that I would do to mitigate risk, is definitely get yourself a survey. And the third thing is to absolutely 100% work with an agent who knows what they're talking about when it comes to rural property, okay, or property in general. The process of building on property is so much different than buying a 3-bed, 2-bath tract house in town. Okay, it's a very, very different thing. There's a lot of different moving parts, and it's something that you really need to, you know, work with somebody who knows what they're doing and who can advise you appropriately. Okay, there's just so many stories out there with people who have hired their friend or their cousin or their brother or whatever it is because they're a realtor, and they got them into a situation that cost them thousands and thousands of dollars, and ultimately, you know, they didn't end up getting what they wanted out of the property because they didn't know to ask the right questions, they didn't know to advise them appropriately. So if you're in my area in Southern Oregon, I'm more than happy to help you, so just reach on out to me. But there's one more thing I want to tell you, and that is that there's a huge area here in Southern Oregon. If you are looking here, there's a huge area here that nobody lives in. Okay, it is like absolutely desolate, and they cannot live there, and it's for good reason. And I'm going to tell you all about that in this video that we've got right over here. It's a super good one. You got to check it out. And if there's anything I can do to help you learn, buy, or list real estate here in Southern Oregon, call me, Brian Simmons, 541-954-7758. I'm with the Buying Southern Oregon Real Estate team here at eXp Realty. I'd love to chat with you. Hope to hear from you soon.